I doubt if there's a single person alive who hasn't been on the receiving end of criticism. It's a daily occurrence, and we're all guilty of it. We criticize people behind their backs, and we're often on the receiving end of it. Given that it's so commonplace, you'd think we'd simply brush it off. But for many people, that's simply not the case. It's true that some people appear to have thicker skins. It's equally the case that some of us appear more sensitive and more alert to criticism, whether real or perceived. This isn't about the critic. That's a whole other issue as to whether the criticism is intended as helpful feedback or a personal attack. This is more about why criticism can make us feel so bad. Understanding the psychology behind our reactions can help us navigate criticism with more grace and compassion for ourselves and others. So, let's explore why criticism hurts and how it affects our emotional well-being. Then I'll offer up some actionable tips on how to handle it constructively. When we experience criticism, our first reaction is often one of hurt or anger. There are a few things going on psychologically when we experience criticism. First, our brain registers overt criticism as a threat. So, when we're criticized, our brain sends out all the same alarm signals as if we were under physical attack. Not surprisingly, we tend to take criticism personally. We see it as a reflection of our worth as a person and not just of our behavior or ideas. This is why it can be so difficult to accept, because it feels like an attack on who we are, not just what we said or did. Of course, human beings are social animals, and as such, we need validation from others to feel good about ourselves. So when we're criticized, it feels like a loss of that validation and approval. All of these psychological factors combine to create a powerful emotional reaction when we're faced with criticism. And unfortunately, this reaction can often lead us to say or do things that make the situation worse instead of better. When we receive criticism, our natural reaction is to protect ourselves, which often manifests in the form of defensiveness. This can lead to a vicious cycle in which the critic feels unheard and unappreciated, and the criticized feels misunderstood and unsupported. When we feel attacked, our fight or flight response is triggered, releasing stress hormones like cortisol into our system. This can impair our ability to think clearly and make rational decisions. We may also tend to ruminate on negative feedback, dwelling on what was said or how it made us feel. This can further damage our self-esteem and lead to depression and anxiety. Our reaction to criticism in part goes back to childhood. As children, we are constantly learning and growing. We learn how to interact with the world around us, partly through trial and error. We need feedback to guide and inform us, and one of the ways we learn is by receiving feedback from others, including criticism. In an ideal world, all feedback would be sensitive and constructive. Sadly, that's not the case. Some can be inaccurate, inappropriate, hurtful and damaging, both at the time it's given and in the long run. The people we admire and look up to can have a profound effect in the way they give feedback. Sustained criticism is essentially bullying. As such, it can affect our self-esteem, our relationships, and our ability to cope with stress. In some extreme cases, I'm thinking here particularly of social media, it can even contribute to suicidal thoughts. There are some things we can do to mitigate the impact of criticism on our self-esteem. For example, we can stand back from it and evaluate the person who is delivering the criticism. How plausible are they? What do they really know or understand? As I mentioned earlier, the criticism that stings the most tends to come from people we look up to and maybe trust the most. If they don't tick those boxes, it's often easier to dismiss their views completely. Nobody can please everybody, and if you try, you'll end up as a non-person with no self-identity. This can take a while to fully process, but it doesn't mean you should become self-centered, because that's just another form of extreme behavior. Remember that criticism is usually more about the critic than it is about you. Try to see it as an opportunity to grow and learn, rather than a personal attack. A mature critic will know the effect of feedback and will attempt to provide you with an explanation along with the feedback. When done properly, it can come across as supportive and well-considered advice rather than a personal attack. We've all been there. Someone says something, or we overhear some cutting remark we weren't meant to, and that makes us feel attacked. What to do? For some people, the instinct is to lash out, whereas others will retreat inside themselves. Put it in perspective. Not all criticism is created equal. Some of it may be valid, while other criticisms may be completely unfounded. Try to weigh each instance of criticism against your own experiences and values before deciding whether or not to take it seriously. Don't dwell on it. Once you've decided how to handle the criticism, let it go and move on with your life. Dwelling on negative feedback will only make things worse. As to the psychology of criticism, it may be useful to know that we all have a negativity bias. That's to say, our brains are wired to pay more attention to negative information than positive information. This negativity bias has evolutionary roots. It helped our ancestors survive by alerting them to potential threats. But in today's world, this negativity bias can work against us. When we're constantly bombarded with negative news stories and critical comments, it can lead us to believe that the world is a dark and dangerous place. This can make us tense and anxious and more prone to react negatively to criticism. Criticism threatens our self-esteem. Our self-esteem is our sense of worth and value as a person. It's how we see ourselves, and it's fragile. Even small criticisms can threaten our self-esteem. When our self-esteem is threatened, we're more likely to feel hurt, defensive, and react in an angry or aggressive way. So in many ways, it really is human nature to focus on our weaknesses rather than our strengths. We are constantly bombarded with messages about what we should be doing better, whether it's from our boss, our friends, or even ourselves. Equally, it's no wonder that we often end up feeling inadequate and discouraged. What if we took a different approach and focused on our personal strengths instead? When we understand and appreciate our own unique talents and abilities, we can start to see ourselves in a more positive light. We can also begin to use our strengths to achieve our goals, instead of letting our weaknesses hold us back. When we focus on personal strengths, we feel better about ourselves and become more motivated to achieve our goals. We also become more resilient in the face of criticism because we know that we have valuable skills and qualities to offer. So next time you're feeling down about yourself, try focusing on your personal strengths instead of your weaknesses. It could make all the difference in how you see yourself and what you're capable of achieving. It's nearly time to wrap up. Yes, criticism can be difficult to take, but it's important to understand the psychology behind our reactions to it. Criticism can feel like a personal attack because we see it as a reflection of our worth as a person. When we're criticized, we may feel that we're not good enough, that we're not doing enough, or that we're not worthy of love and respect. It's also important to remember that criticism is not always accurate or fair, and we sometimes have to consider the merits of the person doing the criticizing. We may be criticized for something that we're actually doing well, or for something that is outside of our control. The key is to not take the criticism too personally. Constructive, sensitive feedback is a different matter. Behaviour doesn't change without feedback, and so that's something to embrace as a part of normal self-development and maturity. Well, that's it for this episode. I hope you found it useful. Drop by our website positivityguides.net to sample our other offerings. So until next time, stay well and stay positive.